This week on BSD Now, we're going to be talking with John Anderson about Capsicum and Casper to securely sandbox processes. Always exciting stuff to talk about. After that, we're going to have tutorial showing you how to encrypt all of your DNS lookups, either on a single system or for your whole network. And of course, we'll have news, emails, and all the usual fun. So right here, keep it tuned to BSD Now, the place to be, SD. BSD Now, episode 39, The Friendly Sandbox, recorded May 28th, 2014. Hey, I'm your host, Chris Moore.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And we're glad to have you with us on the show this week. We got a lot of good information, tutorial, we got a good interview that has been recorded from BSDCan. And speaking of BSDCan, that kind of gets us right into our first headline here. So I guess all the videos, this is every single one, I assume?
I think so. There's
all the talks have been uploaded.
20 videos, so I think that's all of them.
Yeah, that's fantastic. See, now I can actually go catch back up with all the stuff I missed.
Yeah, and each one is almost an hour. Yeah, most of them are like 54 minutes. A couple actually went over an hour. There are a couple that were only like 45 minutes. But yeah, so that's about 20 hours of video to watch. So that will only take, a while.
Only a day or two, right?
Yeah.
Binge watching episodes. But I guess we have the first one here. Carl Lundbauer's keynote is the first one we have mentioned, but we also want to mention he's going to be on the show on next week's episode. So tune back in for that. Yeah. And of course, we have some Pavel here talking about Capsicum and Casper, which is going to be interesting for today's interview as well. Yep, Luigi Rizzo doing some Open vSwitch on FreeBSD.
Yeah, that gives you kind of a framework for switching between virtual machines and stuff. Let you build like software-defined networking.
This is an interesting one here. This may be of interest to Linux folks out here, but migrating from Linux to FreeBSD for backend data storage by Dwayne Hart. So that could be of interest. You may want to go hit that link up if you've been looking at how you would do that. Of course, Warner Losh talking about some NAND flash in FreeBSD. And Simon did a talk on FreeBSD's BMake and meta mode. And of course, something which is still hot in the news, LibreSSL, Bob Beck, did a first 30 days talk on that. So I'm sure that's going to be fascinating and very timely.
Yes, and this video actually has like lapel mic audio, so it's a little easier to listen to than the other video. Nice. Although you don't actually get to see Bob's face because it's the slides.
Just showing the slides? Okay.
But it also makes the slides easier to read and so on.
Hey, well, that's still cool. So Henning Brauer did an open BGPD, which turned 10 years old. So he did a talk on that.
Yeah, that's a good one. I saw it in Tokyo.
Yeah, you have to mention the ones that you actually sat in on.
Not as many as I would have liked. So I have been watching a lot of video as well.
Yeah, you can go catch back up now, too. That's the problem. He makes you choose, Dan. You got, 3 tracks going on simultaneously?
Yeah, and I was, cornering people for interviews. And so then you're kind of at the mercy of which talks they are able to skip?
Sure. So let's see. Next up, we have BSD ARM kernel internals, which Arne Thomas did. Our friend Peter Hessler, who's been on the show, also did a talk on using BGP for real-time spam filtering. So that's pretty cool.
That's what we talked to him on the show about. So it's interesting to see what's changed over the last year with that. Yep.
Let's see. Pedro, I forget how to pronounce his last name, Gafuni, did features and status on FreeBSD's EXT2 implementation. Yeah. And of course, Matt Ahrens, who most common listeners are probably familiar with that name by now, but he did a talk, of course, on OpenZFS, upcoming features and performance enhancements. Tell me you sat in on that one.
Yes, I definitely did.
Okay, you did.
I was in, we had Matt for like 2 hours in the Dev Summit, and then an hour the next day for a Birds of a Feather meeting, and then his talk the next day after that. So he basically had to do something every day at BSDCan.
That's cool. And then after that, we have Dachi Goto, did some talks on shell scripts and commands. And I must say, I've sat in on a couple of his talks before, going into some of the shell stuff they do with their company in Japan. And he is my hero, man. I love shell and wish I coded that as well as those guys.
Yeah.
Next up, we have Benno Rice, did a talk on keeping current. which is pretty cool.
That one is specifically if you're a vendor who bases a product on top of FreeBSD, how to keep your private branch keep up with what's happening in FreeBSD current. So it's if you're working at a company that builds something on top of FreeBSD, that's a very good talk.
So Sean Bruno also did MIPS router hacking.
Yes, so if you have one of those little MIPS routers, like a D-Link or something, and you want to replace the OS on it with FreeBSD, that's a really good one.
Yep. John Mark Gurney did an optimizing jelly performance. Yep. So good encryption talk. Patrick Kesley, user space networking with libuinet. Yep. Maximilio did some more IPv6 transitioning talk. So of course, Maximilio has been working. Is he with RIPE?
Yes, he's with RIPE. I
believe.
Yeah, he was also handing out the little RIPE internet probes at the conference.
Nice. Very cool.
I have mine. It's all hooked up and working.
Mm-hmm. Roger did a talk on taking the red pill. Did you get a subtitle on that one?
That's about Zen, running Zen.
Zen, okay. Good deal. Sean Webb introducing ASLR and FreeBSD.
Right, that's the cool. Address-based layout randomization and position-independent execution. I
think that's going to be kind of a standard thing going forward. You're going to see a lot of OSs do that. Yep. But we also have a trip report from Peter Hessler and one from Julio talking about their experiences at BSDCan. We'll have the links to that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, for Julio, it was his first Dev Summit as a committer, and so he talked about how great that was and how enthused the conferences really get you. And he kind of reiterated that theme that we've all talked about of how going to these conferences kind of recharges your BSD battery and gets you excited about stuff again.
He also mentions and kind of puts the challenge out there saying, NetBSD folks, you need to get out there and have some presence at the event. Yeah. And how that's been a recurring trend at other conferences. So if you're a NetBSD developer, user, fan, definitely come on out and represent your product.
They had a couple of people at Euro, but compared to OpenBSD and FreeBSD, they didn't really have that much of a presence.
Definitely. Okay, so that's pretty much the roundup on all the talks. So definitely hit those links up. It'll keep you busy for a long time watching all those videos. Next up, we got a cool article this week on defending your network and privacy with a VPN and OpenBSD. Now, this is pretty cool. We read through this article this week, and it's basically how to set up an OpenVPN gateway with OpenBSD. I'll be honest with you, Alan, sometimes these things scare me a little bit because I'm more afraid of making a mistake and leaving something open. You know what I mean?
There is that, but the problem, one of the reasons this came up is because we've seen that a bunch of the regular off-the-shelf routers you buy at Best Buy or Walmart or whatever have turned out to have backdoors in them that would allow people to just go in and take them over. At least with an OpenBSD machine, you can trust that it didn't come with a backdoor, and if there was a mistake, it was your fault. It wasn't put there by someone without your knowledge.
But what I was going to mention is having this kind of article takes a little bit of that fear away.
Exactly.
Because this is a very detailed article talking everything from prereqs, what you need to get started, what you're going to be doing. Every bit of configuration is listed in here, including starting the installation, etc. So hopefully following something like this will keep you from making that boneheaded mistake, which may leave something open that you didn't plan on being available. But it's pretty cool. It goes through everything from setting up NTP to DHCPD, firewall, of course, running PF, OpenBSD. Yep. So that's going to be about the best you can get, and how to build packages from the ports tree, setting up DNS, VPNs, which of course is critical in today's world, and watchdog scripts, which is pretty slick as well.
Yeah, so that's looks
like he posted the whole thing in here.
So the tunnel actually stays up, right? So you got to keep pinging it to keep it alive and reset it if it does fail.
Sure. Including how to set up your Windows clients for a VPN. Yep. So that's pretty slick as well. But yeah, I mean, great article. Definitely recommend you check it out. Any other thoughts you had on that?
No, it's interesting. He gave thanks to our router tutorial at the end of his article and said that part of his setup was actually based on that. And then he just took it further. Cool. So that's great.
Yeah. That was the inspiration. But yeah, he has definitely fleshed it out, because this is a great walkthrough on the whole process. Yep. One that I would feel more comfortable running or doing, since I'm not a big OpenBSD user as well. This would be something I'd feel okay with getting started on. Yep. Okay, next up, we have another article this week called "You Should Try FreeBSD." And let me see here. So, of course, the article kind of goes into, you may have heard of FreeBSD or any BSD, but have you used it? So, of course, if yes, you can stop right here. But if not, this article is going to go through why you should probably look at doing that. Anything you want to comment on that about?
No, it covers it very good. It's he says. It kind of answers the question of if you already have a Ubuntu server, why you should still look at BSD.
Sure. And what some of the differences are and some of the history specifically about FreeBSD, some of the apparent and then not so apparent differences between the two, which are good. Of course, goes into stability and some of the strengths, such as ZFS, of course, jails. How to deal with documentation when you Google a problem and you keep getting answers that reference apt.
Yeah, specifically,
if you're a FreeBSD user.
Specifically, they mentioned, if you're looking at Stack Overflow answers or whatever, they always say it's like, well, partly maybe you should consider not trusting random answers left on a site on the internet. Now, Stack Overflow tends to be pretty good, and they have a voting system to kill off the not good advice. But in FreeBSD, there's a whole group of people that spend a lot of time working on the handbook, making sure that there's actually an authoritative source that tells you the best way to do something or the most supported way to do something, so that it's not going to fall out from underneath you all of a sudden.
Yeah, reduces the frequency where you're left with having to Google a problem and trying to figure out from some random post on a forum 3 years ago, how to fix something or change something. So a cool quote from the article here. He says, I like to compare FreeBSD to a really tidy room where you can find everything with your eyes closed. Once you know where the closets are, and it's really easy to grab what you need, even if you've never touched it before. Yep. So it's just laid out and organized very well, so you'll feel comfortable right out of the box. Yep. But very cool. Appreciate that article. Of course, we'll have the link in the show notes afterwards, so give that a read if you're still BSD curious out there and haven't tried it yet. That'd be a great way to get your feet wet. Yep. Next up, we have an article about OpenBSD. So who wrote this one, Alan?
It's OpenBSD and the little Mauritian who contributed. So this is a story about a guy from the island of Mauritius named Logan, and he's now one of OpenBSD's newest developers. But it basically covers his story from back when he started by just sending patches for MG, the text editor, and a bunch of other small things, and how he eventually turned into a OpenBSD developer and got his account.
Even got a picture with Theo taken at a recent hackathon. So I mean, that was worth it right there. Yep. But cool. It shows how easy it is to get involved with the different BSDs and contribute back to the software ecosystem. So we want to congratulate Logan, of course, for taking this journey. And hopefully this is going to inspire more people to start helping out and contributing back, seeing how you've done it and taken the first steps and gotten plugged in. And if you're inspired, if you have a BSD of choice, Net, Open, Free, Dragonfly, or any of them, definitely get involved.
Yes.
It's well worth it, and it'll be a fun journey.
If they'll let me in, they'll let anybody in.
Wow, you've done good stuff, Alan.
But I have no idea what I'm doing.
Well, cool. So that's our weekly news. Of course, we want to mention this week's sponsor, of course, Tarsnap. So we first, before we get started, let's mention the website, tarsnap.com/BSD Now. And we also want to mention they got a couple of other pages here that it might be of interest to you. So tarsnap.com/security.html or /crypto.html. So if you take a look at those, you can kind of get into some of the gory details, why this is the way you want to do your backups, why it's secure, how does this work, how does the crypto work?
Especially, I guess the biggest question of the articles that Colin has talked about before was, other backup services promise not to give away your files. Colin's service is designed so that he could not possibly decrypt your files to be able to give them away, even if he was at gunpoint. Yeah.
And so you're not having to trust his word or his own internal security or something.
Exactly.
A break
he actually
make compromising. He actually cannot get access to your data.
Exactly. He has an article on his blog about why you should assume he works for the NSA. And why it still doesn't matter.
Sure. But again, that URL, tarsnap.com/BSD Now, check it out. Great backup service. If you need a place where you can store your data off-site securely, again, trusting that it can't be decrypted or gotten into by rogue agencies or businesses or malicious individuals, etc. You definitely want to take a look at Tarsnap. A great way to back up your sensitive data.
Yeah, specifically, he avoids using SSL so that it doesn't use certificates. So even if the NSA compromised the certificate authorities, they can't perform a man-in-the-middle attack. Instead, there's fixed keys used for it and kind of reduced set of crypto that gets rid of the complexity and just uses RSA with Diffie-Hellman and 2048-bit keys.
Yeah, I'm looking through his cryptography page here. This is definitely this looks pretty legit, pretty darn secure. I'm not sure what you could do better, and if you could think of something better to do, you could probably let Colin know, and he would take a look at it. But yeah, this is great service. Highly recommended. If you guys need a service, go ahead and sign up there and let them know that we sent you. Of course,
you are doing backups, right?
Yeah, you should be doing backups.
So everybody needs Tarsnap.
Definitely. Well, cool. We'll be back in just a moment with our interview this week with John Anderson over at the FreeBSD project.
This week, we're joined by John Anderson, an assistant professor at Memorial University in Newfoundland, Canada, and a contributor to Capsicum.
That's right.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Well, thank you for having me.
So the first question we always ask people is, how did you get started using BSD?
I actually got started using BSD when I started hacking on BSD. So I was a research student at the University of Cambridge, and Robert Watson had an office kind of across the hall and 2 doors down. And one day he knocked on my door and said, "Have you ever done any kernel hacking?" And I said, "No, not really." And he said, "Would you like to?" And I said, "Sure, that sounds like fun." And FreeBSD was this platform for doing security research, in this case Capsicum. And along the way I was like, oh, actually, this is a really nice operating system to use too. Maybe I'll start putting this on servers and desktops and things. And so that's how it all got started.
Right. And then I guess from there you got into doing Capsicum?
Yeah, exactly. So this was a project that Robert had previously started and had some ideas percolating and things, but it's a little bit stalled, and sometimes you need somebody else to bounce ideas off of. And so I got involved and helped out and did a couple of the pieces, like the namespace subsetting of file systems and stuff, as well as just generally bouncing ideas around. And yeah, eventually we got the work together and got it into the tree, and also got some good publications out of it, which of course as academics we care about.
Yes. So I guess for our viewers, can you give us a bit of an overview of what Capsicum is and what it does?
Sure. So Capsicum is a kind of sandboxing compartmentalization framework for applications. So we have existing security mechanisms in FreeBSD and other operating systems, but they're often based on either the idea of keeping users apart from each other or applying some sort of top-level policy, such as, this user is cleared to secret or top secret, and this document is classified in the following way. Neither of those models are really a great fit for sandboxing applications, taking an application that has some rights and it's allowed to do the things you're allowed to do, and restricting it so that when one piece of it goes wrong, when a render has been compromised by some evil malicious video codec, that it's not allowed to make havoc with the machine. And so what Capsicum does is it allows you to take a process and put it into a least privilege capability mode. And in this mode, you're not allowed to access global namespaces, so things like the file system or System 5 shared memory or various kinds of global namespaces that normal applications can access. But we also allow you to do really fine-grained delegation of rights. So the things you can do, a file descriptor it's a bit like this historic notion of a thing called an object capability, which was a way of talking about authority, and it's this unforgeable thing that you pass around, kind of like a reference in JavaScript. You can't just do pointer arithmetic and make one up. Somebody has to pass you a reference. Well, a descriptor is a little bit like that. The kernel has to say, here's a file that I've opened for you. However, if I take a read-only file descriptor and pass it to another process, because that's the sandboxed process, it's the render and I'm the trusted browser, well, it can do things like change the file permissions on that file, which is not what I intended. So we provide a way to pass just the rights that you want on a particular file descriptor around. And so between taking away access to the global namespace and providing a really fine-grained way to share access to things that you want to share access to, we're able to really confine applications so that when they go wrong, there's a very limited subset of things that they can do, and malicious applications aren't able to do many of the things they would normally be able to do, look through your home directory, that sort of thing.
So I guess Capsicum's been implemented in a number of the base utilities now.
Yep.
Do you have some examples of how that works?
Sure. So one example that we always come back to is TCP dump, which it is an application that is written for interacting with hostile data. Oh, there's something going wrong on my network. Well, I better run TCP dump. But you have to run it as root, and it has all of these parsers that are written by who knows who people who said, well, I can sort of parse the SNMP protocol. But perhaps not with a security mindset, and they're just full of vulnerabilities. And so it's this trifecta of, it has all this privilege, not really written with security in mind, and you often run it when you know you're under attack. So this is a little bit dangerous, but what we're able to do with TCP dump is to, before it receives any data, it can do its initial privileged setup stuff, and then we can enter a sandbox such that it's not able to open other files, for instance. So we can point it at a directory where it's going to put its dump files, that sort of thing. But this means that when you compromise TCP dump, that the code that you inject is no longer allowed to open random files or change passwords or add things to SBIN, for instance.
Or open other interfaces.
Or open other interfaces, or do anything, or run funny ioctls that will change the behavior of your network card. All it's allowed to do is corrupt the output file. Now, it can corrupt the output file. That's a fundamental limitation, but that's not so bad. It's certainly not allowed to do the other things that you normally associate with compromising a set UID binary.
Yeah, especially,
or a binary run as root, sorry.
Yeah, anything that's running as root. When you compromise it, there's no limit to what you can do generally.
Exactly.
And this way, it's like you can mess with that directory that I made just for this purpose.
Exactly.
So I guess the other part of Capsicum now is there's a Casper daemon. What does that do?
That's right. So Capsicum, there's a kernel level API, which we have is turned on by default in FreeBSD 10, and people at Google are trying very hard to get it into Linux, and Dragonfly BSD is looking at it, and OpenBSD is looking at it, or somebody in OpenBSD Summer of Code. Yep. But the thing is, the kernel level API, like many kernel APIs, is not, it's fine and it works well and it provides good isolation, but it might not be the thing that you want to write higher level applications on top of. In those cases, often you don't want to think about file descriptors, you want to think about services, for instance. And so Casper is really, it's the capability services provider, or Casper the Friendly Ghost, and it is about providing services to applications that normally you might be able to do for yourself, but you can't because you're in a sandbox. So an example is you want to resolve names. Well, normally you might open etcresolve.conf, and then you might open a socket, and then you might do some communication. Well, when you're in a sandbox, you're not allowed to do all of these opening things in a global namespace. So instead, you talk to Casper and you say, do you have the DNS service? And Casper says, yeah, I have the DNS service, and let's see, I will pass that back to you. And so then you have a handle that you can use to talk to a DNS service provider. Right. And so it's kind of a higher level construct, but it's also something that is easier to share. So you have the initial socket that lets you talk to Casper, and that you can send other sockets over. However, after you have acquired the services that you need, you can drop that connection to Casper, and a bit like the Capsicum model in general, you can drop that that authority effectively before you start doing untrusted things. So that when you start processing code or start processing packets or doing whatever you're doing, you might be able to do DNS queries, but you're no longer able to do all of the things that you need to do in order to do DNS, but that could be abused to do other things too.
Right. Like raw sockets or whatever.
Like raw sockets.
Awesome. I guess, is there anything else interesting with Capsicum and Casper?
Well, we keep trying to get it implemented in other platforms. So we have an API which we hope other people will pick up as well. But yeah, it's really, there are still opportunities for people to apply this stuff to the base system. And
I guess, for it to be useful, it needs to be implemented in more applications, I suppose, right?
Yeah, so we've upstreamed it, the OpenSSH people have taken the changes. So now you use Capsicum on any platform that you run OpenSSH on that supports Capsicum, which currently is just us. Right. But as I said, we're working on that. And yeah, we're hoping that other upstream providers will, and application developers will see this as a sensible model, which, you look at Chrome, they have all these different ways of trying to do sandboxing, and some of them try to approximate basically what Capsicum does. So we're hoping that people will see this as a useful, sensible API for talking about sandboxing, and that over time there'll be some pressure to switch away from things that almost approximate it to actually just doing the right thing.
Properly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So is there are you still working on it, or?
Yeah, so at the moment I am working on some changes to the runtime linker that'll make it easier to have bigger and more complicated applications running inside of sandboxes. In particular, the linker, if it's also in a sandbox, needs to know how it's going to go out and find libraries and things. And I'm hoping that will develop, or that will enable the development of a general purpose capability shell that will be able to take unmodified applications and run it in a sandbox, looking at arguments on the command line and things in order to figure out what we need to pass in, but otherwise running code that doesn't understand any of this sandboxing stuff within a sandbox, which hopefully will be a foundation for all kinds of things that we currently do with jails and other sort of heavyweight mechanisms.
Right. That's really interesting. So do you know any other applications that are currently using Capsicum other than...
Well, certainly on FreeBSD, our Chromium does. So Pavel Davidek has done lots of work on converting a bunch of base system utilities.
Yeah, I think the DHCP client.
Yeah, so DH client is there. We've gzip, so when you look at a man page, you're actually using Capsicum, that sort of thing. But yeah, we are trying to get patches upstream to places like the Chrome developers, in which case they might have an incentive to put these things even in Chrome OS. But yeah, so it is an API that it's a chicken and egg problem. How do you get an API adopted? How do you get applications to use it when there are no platforms? How do you get platforms to do it when there are no applications? And so we are working on the chicken and the egg simultaneously.
Right, yeah. I guess with FreeBSD is the platform and the shell letting more applications use it and actually start getting the benefit from it so that everybody sees, hey, this is amazing, let's start doing that.
Yeah.
Cool.
And there's always a reward for just improving the security of FreeBSD.
Exactly. Yeah, actually, well, I guess Powell builds a product based on a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, his company does lots of interesting things, and apparently many Polish banks benefit from these security features. So yeah, that's I guess great for people who bank in Poland.
Yes. All right, then. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
And we're back now. We're ready to go into our weekly news roundup. But before that, of course, we want to mention our other sponsor this week on the show. Of course, iXsystems. And they got a couple cool links they shared with us for this week's show about their BSDCan wrap-ups. So we have two wrap-ups first. First from John Hickson, who's a developer on FreeNAS.
Yes.
Works for iXsystems and was at the conference.
We interviewed him back in Japan.
Yeah, we did. We did. When we played that one already, correct?
I think so.
Okay, I'm pretty sure we did. So hopefully you guys have seen that. But he talks about how he attended the OpenZFS sessions, of course, which being a FreeNAS developer, that's always of interest. He also attended several of the talks that are in the conference, the bulk of which are ARM related. I know John's a big fan of his BeagleBones and little embedded devices. So he said one was on ARM superpages. He went to another one on ARM internals, and yet another one on the BeagleBone on FreeBSD. So that's really cool. Wish you luck with that, John. I know that always looks so interesting when you bring your backpack of Magic out and you have all these little weird devices hanging out of it. I'm sure airport security loves you. But he of course mentions one of the best aspects about BSDCan being the hallway conversations between attendees, which we can attest to that.
For sure.
I mean, sometimes you go for the talks, but sometimes in the hallway afterwards, that 10-15 minutes is worth its weight in gold.
Exactly.
Or you can just talk to.
We sat in the
talk to the developer
hackers lounge all night, every night. Because I remember the one night you just all of a sudden there's this knocking on the outside door that nobody even realized was a door, and there's just John Hickson sitting there with his shawarma. He's like, "Let me in." That was great.
Shawarma makes the hacking work so much better. But next up, we have Drew Levine wrote a recap of her time at BSDCan as well. Yeah. So she was there, I guess, early when they had a FreeBSD Foundation Board of Directors meeting. So they talked a little bit about how the Foundation's serving the project and where they can improve their efforts in advocating FreeBSD, sponsor projects to move the project forward, and reaching out to companies that use FreeBSD. So that's one of the things, a couple of the things the Foundation does.
Exactly.
They also met with some of the core team members from the FreeBSD project to listen to some of their perspectives on how the Foundation's supporting the project and ways they can improve that, of course. Then she talks about going to the Developer Summit, and they began with a session on brainstorming the features to appear in 11, and then broke into two working groups which focused on particular topics such as ports, virtualization, DNS, ZFS, etc. And it says she helped co-chair the working group on improving the translation process for documentation. Yes. So that's definitely a good one. Getting docs in local languages is very important.
Yes, actually, FreeBSD trying to catch up to PCBSD on that particular one.
Yeah. Well, maybe they'll use some of the stuff we do.
That's what they were looking at.
Were they looking at like Poodle?
Yep, and some of the other tools based around that.
Yep. Well, that's cool. We'll wish them luck with that. And if they need anything, let us know or let me know.
And then the other thing she mentioned was the doc sprints, getting people that were new up to speed on how to do docs. I learned how to do that at last year's doc sprint. And like she says here, getting some users trained on how to use the stuff and get them to successfully submit a patch, right? They make a patch, instead of sending a PR and waiting a couple days for somebody to pick it up, it's the person sitting beside you takes it, reviews it, and commits it right away. And then with that means that they get to see the process happening much quicker.
Definitely.
And mostly it would take several days or weeks to explain over IRC in little bits and pieces all the parts that come together to make the docs work. Whereas when you're sitting beside somebody, you can do it in half an hour or an hour.
Just makes a lot more sense.
Yep.
And she says the doc spin on Saturday evening, they stayed there after dinner and stayed late enough that the janitor had to kick them out. So that's a good sign. He had to drag them from the room kicking.
And then we just went to the hacker lounge and kept working anyway.
Resumed elsewhere.
Well, I think Drew went to bed, but some of us kept hacking.
She said several new users are trained how to use the FreeBSD doc tools and successfully submitted patches and watched as they were committed, like you were talking about, Alan. So that's great.
And also, we had some people from the other projects. OpenBSD people were there, and we got to look at some of their new tools for man pages and stuff. So that was also interesting cross-pollination between the doc groups.
Nice. All right, well, anyway, cool. So those are the
back to iXsystems and how they support the projects by sending these people to do
good write-ups. They did. Oh, go ahead.
Alan. iX, as you can see, is a very big part of the community by making sure these type of things can happen. Not only did they sponsor the conference, but they sent some people there to make this stuff happen. And on top of all that, they also make really good hardware.
Definitely.
I got my system from them. It arrived last week, later in the week, and it's all set up and running now. I got a machine with another 12 3-terabyte hard drives, chugging away with ZFS on it. And I literally took it out of the box and put it in the rack and turned it on. It's all ready to go.
And that was it. Yep. They had done all the work ahead of time.
I decided to plug the hard drives in. And
that's very cool. And of course, all their systems use the latest and greatest Intel processors.
Yep, I got the E5 2620 V2, which is all the sexiness that you can get. And it's, lots of RAM.
I mean, we've shown some of the behemoth systems they've
in the
past. I mean, no job too big or too small.
Mine doesn't have 700 and some odd terabytes like their Terrafiler, but, it's good enough for my basement.
Sure, yeah. Hey, and it fits your needs.
Exactly.
It does what you wanted it to do.
That was the biggest thing was, I needed it to work for this specific workload, which is different than most people's. So, the regular system wouldn't have been the right fit. And some other vendor wouldn't have built a custom system just for me. They would have been like, well, you can have this one. Or, no, we don't support what you're trying to do. With iX, they, rather than you telling them what server you want, you tell them what your problem is, and they propose the best solution for it.
Yep. Design it based on your specifications, not by what hardware just happened to be laying around.
Exactly. And the biggest thing is that, when you email their sales guys with a question, they're like sales engineers. They actually know the hardware, right? They don't just have some spec sheets, and they didn't have to, take a product knowledge class or something to know the basics and the buzzwords. Dealing with other vendors, I was reminded of when I went to help my sister buy her first smartphone, and the salesperson kept saying that the phone had a core dual processor instead of a dual core processor because they didn't actually know what it meant. They were just parroting what they had
read on a flyer.
Yeah, exactly. And with iX, you don't get that. You get people that actually know, and you ask them a question, they're like, well, there's this thing and this thing, and then, they're really experts at the hardware, and that makes a big difference in getting a system that's going to just work properly.
Well, in addition, their expertise in the software. I mean, this is a hardware company that employs a lot of software developers as well.
Yes.
So they understand how your software that runs on the hardware is going to interact with it, and what they can do to make it optimized and run best, the most stable and fastest it can be.
And they have very good relationships with their upstream vendors to make sure that, they're good FreeBSD drivers and that you can get all the support you need to make stuff work.
Yep.
And leveraging that has been very good.
Cool. Well, we'll mention the URL. So it's iXsystems.com/BSD Now. Go there, fill out the fields, let them know that we sent you. Get in touch with them, see if there's any way they can help you out with whatever problem it is you're trying to solve. And of course, when you sign up there, you can download the free digital guide on purchasing a server for open source. The top things you need to know before you pick a vendor and go that route. And again, like we said, just let them know that we sent you here on BSD Now. Okay, next up, time for our weekly news roundup. So first up, we have some FreeBSD journal news. It looks like the May 2014 issue just came out. I see a picture here. Do you have that on the screen there, Alan?
I do. So this is the May-June issue, because there's one issue every 2 months. And the top articles are IPFW, exploring network activity with dtrace. One of the interesting things about dtrace is that it's very high performance, so you can actually attach a probe and look at almost every dropped packet and actually figure out why without killing your system. Then there's one on KQ.
Nice.
Data distribution using DNSSEC by Michael Lucas. That one looks really interesting. And there's also one on TCP scaling, if you want to get more out of your TCP stack. Plus the regular columns. You have the foundation letter, the ports report with all the interesting stuff that's going on in the ports tree, SVN update, what's coming up in the new FreeBSD 9.3 that started the release cycle. And then Drew has this month in FreeBSD and the events calendar.
Oh, okay, cool. What's coming up? Places you can meet other developers, I assume.
Yes, there's BSDCan coming up, and then there's BSDCan, and then there's going to be another developer summit in Silicon Valley in November, and lots of interesting stuff.
Cool. So, of course, you can go ahead and pick up your copy, digital copy, of course, at Amazon, Google Play, or iTunes.
And actually, there's a browser viewer now, so you can actually read it on any computer as well. You don't have to have a tablet or, Amazon, Apple, or Google device to do it. Yeah. Exactly. You can actually just buy it and view it on the website. And it's got all the features of the tablet version as well now.
Nice. Yes. Okay, well, next up, we have some information about LibreSSL, a porting update. I guess we have a new blog post about that. Since the last LibreSSL post we covered, there's been a couple unofficial portable versions that have died off.
Yes, well, we covered, this guy had an article a couple weeks ago about what those ones were doing wrong, and a couple of them that were doing it completely wrong have since went away.
Sure. So it's the post is, of course, reiterating a lot of what we've talked about before, that LibreSSL currently relies on a lot of OpenBSD-specific security functions that are not present on other systems, and gives a pretty eye-opening example on how that works and why just a straight port where you change a function may not be in your best interest running on another platform.
For example, the OpenBSD depends on this thing called explicit_B0, which will zero out the memory. The difference is that most compilers will see the B0 and optimize it out, whereas the explicit version will make sure that that doesn't get optimized out.
Sure, and, intentionally.
Yes. And some of the porting efforts were just like, oh, well, my OS doesn't have explicit B0, so I'll just use B0. And that has security implications that they weren't considering.
Yeah, I mean, have we not learned anything after what just happened with the Heartbleed bug? Like, let's take our time and do this right and be careful in how we port this. Yep. But we want to mention, of course, wait for an official portable version instead of wasting time on just some random GitHub clone you found, which
is put up by some guy
that's been audited or looked at, or how well it's been ported.
Exactly.
Cool. Okay, another magazine to talk about now. BSD Magazine's May 2014 issue is out as well.
Yeah.
And I assume you have the link to show there, Alan. Yep. But it's their usual monthly release from the BSD Magazine, which is a digital magazine again, covering a variety of subjects. This time around, the topics include managing large development projects using RCS, working with HammerFS, so that's interesting, and the various PFs, running Meteor.js on FreeBSD 11, and another Beehive article, GIMP tutorials, and a few other things. So that's definitely cool. And it is a free PDF, so you can go ahead and grab that, fire it up on your tablet or in your web browser, and read away.
Oh, apparently they have a crossword this time.
Oh, a crossword.
Yeah. And then,
are they BSD related questions?
It's a FreeBSD cryptic crossword.
Oh, okay. There you go. Cool. Well, we want to mention also our good friend Will Bachman, BSD Talk, now has episode 241 out, and we want to mention this time it's with Bob Beck.
Yes, about LibreSSL. He stole our interview.
He's going to be talking about some of their OpenBSD Foundation's recent activities, his own work on the project, and some stories about the hardware in Theo's basement, which is pretty cool, and a lot more.
Lots of inside
scoop. That's right. So the interview isn't just about LibreSSL, but they do touch on it a bit. And, of course, a lot of interesting stuff, which covers a lot of different topics in a short amount of time. So, of course, we recommend BSD Talk. Will's been doing that a long time, longer than this
241 episodes. That's even more than my other podcast has been doing every single week for 3-some-odd years now.
It's going to take us a while to catch up to Will, but he set a good pace, so that's good. Yeah. But, of course, we want to highlight that. Go ahead and check it out. You can download that and listen to it anywhere you have access to a system that'll play audio. Okay. So, of course, feedback and questions will be coming up next. We'll be back with those in just a moment. Okay, next up on BSD Now, we have feedback and questions from you in the audience. So before we get started with that, though, we had a question last week about Cisco and doing a VPN. So we had a ton of people write in, more than I can count. I don't remember exactly how many we got, but a number of them had different suggestions. One of the best ones, though, was just install the client. So I guess in the security VPNC section of ports, we have a client which will do that for you and can establish a VPN to your Cisco device.
It's actually called VPNC as in VPN client. It's quite useful.
Yeah. So what do you know? We learn something new every day. I didn't even know that was in there. But yep, that's what you'll need. Yep. Grab that, and that should get you all set up with your Cisco client.
Cool.
Okay, so now we'll get to the questions for this week. So first up, we have a question from Tim. He says, I've heard you mention CF Engine 3, Puppet, Chef, Salt, and Ansible in passing on various episodes. He'd love to hear our thoughts comparing them and why you'd choose the ones you do. Tutorials would be great too, but he'd be delighted with even a high-level feature comparison. Yeah. Well, I don't think we've gone specifically into any of these.
Not really.
Not really. I mean, we've mentioned them. I've personally seen Puppet and gone to some tutorials on that, and seen a little bit of Salt, but haven't used them extensively. Are you using them right now?
I'm using Puppet, mostly because it was the first one that I saw mention FreeBSD support. And so I started using it. And then after I found out about Salt, which apparently had slightly better FreeBSD support, but I hadn't really looked into that. And then I've heard many good things about Ansible, but that it doesn't have some of the features, but some of the features it doesn't have are ones most people wouldn't use. So especially for a lighter weight administration type thing, Ansible is apparently pretty good as well.
Cool.
I don't really have time to try them all, and I've kind of basically invested in Puppet, and changing would be a lot of work, and I have Puppet doing what I need, so I'm not that interested in changing. But, if somebody has tried a bunch of them and would like to share their notes, we'd love to cover that.
Yeah, I know some of the iX folks, coworkers of mine, are big fans of Salt. Yep. So that's their favorite. They really, I guess, appreciate the FreeBSD integration that it has. Think it's a great product. So, I've not had to personally use any of them yet.
And I guess the advantage to Salt and I think Ansible is they're both based on Python. And we know the people at iX love the Python.
They do love their Python. Yes, they do.
Yeah. Whereas Puppet is based on Ruby, which nobody particularly likes, but it does work.
You tolerate Ruby and it gets something done. Yeah, I gotcha. Well, that would be something interesting. Maybe in a future episode we could do kind of a tutorial on that. We'll throw that in the hopper, something about configuring your BSD systems with these services. So good suggestion there, Tim. Okay, next up we have something from AJ. So what's he got here, Alan?
He's saying, great show. He says he hasn't been able to keep up to date on everything, but he's going back and watching stuff as he can. He wanted to ask if we about covering Unbound or one of the other similar the DNS alternatives that are in the base system now. More specifically, he wants to know what we would use for a complete DNS solution. Now, depending what you're trying to do, right? Unbound is mostly designed as a resolver, right? It's meant to go out and turn names into IP addresses for your system. Whereas bind is meant to serve those records out to other people to be authoritative for a domain. And so they're really not meant to do the same thing. most people don't have to run a DNS server per se, right? They're not hosting their own domain name. So that's why bind was taken out of the base system and replaced with unbound, since most people just need to be able to look up names, not to actually provide, just need a resolver, not an authoritative server. So you can't, as far as I know, you can't use unbound to be an authoritative server. I'm not sure. I've never really looked into it.
I don't think it can, but
I've not really looked into it. A, I'm still mostly on FreeBSD 9, and B, for our DNS servers, we actually use GDNSD, which is more of a load balancer built in DNS, and it has dynamic record types where, you know, it return this IP address for the website, but if that's down, return this other IP address instead. Things like that. So that's mostly what I use, and you can see my talks on that at BSDCan 2012 and 2013. And then he also mentioned stuff like Amazon Route 53. I know Colin used that at least for a while for FreeBSD Update or Tarsnap, or one of the two, or both maybe. And he says, but knowing that I own my own stuff, which way I would use it, I use some bind still, mostly leftover, and then GDNSD. But that's what I do. Bind coming from the port instead of the base system just makes it easier to update.
Sure.
Really. So, apparently OpenBSD uses NSD4, which gives you an authoritative server, and then unbound for the resolver. So, next question.
Okay, next question. We got Peter. So he says, first of all, I love the show, especially since BSD's my preferred OS to study. So much less confusing than Linux, he throws in. But he has one issue that keeps gnawing at him. He says he has a Haswell HD 4600 graphics. He bought a laptop about 9 months ago, specs below, and originally it had Sandy Brig architecture, but with his luck, of course, when he went to buy it, they had restocked it with all Haswell systems. Well, he had assumed it would work 100% for Linux, that the compatibility would not be so bad. He tried FreeBSD 9 too. It had no USB mouse and Wi-Fi, but when 10 came out, it was awesome. It fixed everything but the one problem of the Haswell graphics. The graphics are okay, except for some flaws where windows are slow and choppy and video is very laggy. It's not accelerated, I believe. Yeah. So this is happening on all the desktop he's tried, and PCBSD was about the same. He says he's used Google Magic, and he's tried the FreeBSD wiki pages about graphics, doing the rebuilding Xorg with new Xorg and stuff, and he blew up his desktop magnificently with that. Speaking of which, we have that on by default in PCBSD, so if you want to try that, that would be an easier way to do it than trying to rebuild all of your ports and packages with those flags. But he asks, he asks if there's anything he can do to help the situation besides wait for FreeBSD and PCBSD catch up. So I will mention, you had said you'd looked at the wiki, but if you go to wiki.freebsd.org/graphics with a capital G, scroll down, just do a search for Haswell, and you'll see, of course, that it's mentioned as not supported. But there's a link on the right where if you follow those links, you will find some patches that just got updated a couple weeks ago, it looks like, May 7th, which adds some additional support to the DRM. So that may be your place where you can take a look at it and try it. I know it mentions here in the comment that there's a foundation project sponsoring that's being done by Kib at FreeBSD, who's doing some work to update this code.
Yeah, so it's porting the Linux driver for that Haswell over to FreeBSD.
It is.
Yeah, and hopefully that'll be done soon, and that will solve that problem.
Yeah, so go ahead and hit up those links on the wiki page. Click the link that says update the DRM generic code to Linux 3.8, and on there you'll find a patch from again, only a couple weeks old now. He said it's working nicely with the Radeon GPUs, but the i915 is a little too old. But this update will allow the updating of that 915 to take place a little later. So, check that out. Get in touch with the developer. Maybe there's something you can help test or work
part
with.
of it is the developer only has so many pieces of hardware. And so people that have the ones he doesn't have to help do testing is kind of a big thing. So,
yeah, definitely take a look at that. See if you can get in touch with them and hopefully try some patches out. You know, for the PCBSD side, we're of course just going to be running what FreeBSD has. So when we roll a 10 or 11 image, you can try that. But it looks like this isn't even in 11 yet or in head. So,
but hopefully soon.
We'll get that when it shows up. Hopefully sooner rather than later. Yeah. Okay, so next up, Alan, question from Thomas for you.
Yes. So he says, hello. The last week or so, he's been contemplating whether he would like to graduate from FreeNAS to a full FreeBSD. He says he had a grand time with his first experience using an encrypted storage with fault tolerance and snapshots with containers and so on. But he seems that there's a few things that he wants to do that would justify switching to actual FreeBSD for the system to give him that little bit more flexibility. He says he'd also like to separate more of his services that he currently has in use, putting each different thing in a jail.
Sure.
He says, FreeNAS has been doing all this stuff brilliantly, but it won't let me put it in a jail, specifically like Samba. I'm not sure about how Samba accesses the network to put it in a jail. Might work. Although the issue with putting it in a jail is that you'd have to mount all of your data sets.
Well, you probably need vimage support in the kernel and all that too.
I don't know if you need vimage or not. It'll depend. Yeah, I've never actually tried to run Samba in a jail because each ZFS dataset is a separate file system. You'd have to manually mount each one of those with a nullifs or whatever into the jail, or have them only exist in the jail. So that can, if you're just using Samba, that's okay. But if you want Samba to have access to all your files and Plex to have access to all your files, you would have to basically have everything mounted in two different places because each jail can't see the files outside of the jail. And, it's easy if it's all one file system, but when you have sub-data sets and stuff, it gets more complicated because each one would have to be mounted separately.
Yeah.
I don't know. Samba in the jail seems kind of paranoid, but obviously it's something you can try to do and have fun with it. The nice thing about the way FreeNAS works is, a ZFS pool is a ZFS pool. So you can just export it and then import it on a FreeBSD system and it'll be there. Although you'll have to do all the Samba config yourself. Right? You're not going to have the web GUI from FreeNAS to do that for you anymore. And so on. But it should definitely be doable. And then he mentions Beehive, although you only get that in FreeBSD 10 or later. And he's like, it has PCI pass-through, and he's like, well, I could pass both my NICs through and have a real firewall. Yes, although then you don't have any NICs left for the host machine, depending how you do it. But, definitely an option. That's one of the nice things with FreeNAS is that you're not really locked into the appliance forever. You can grab that pool and mount it in anything that runs ZFS, which at this point is, all the Solaris derivatives, FreeBSD, Linux, and Mac OS X. So that doesn't leave very many systems that you can't import your FreeNAS pool onto. Although if it's encrypted, then you're restricted to just FreeBSD.
Yeah, that's a little harder. Cool.
But,
okay.
As far as switching, I've mostly just used FreeBSD instead of FreeNAS because I've always wanted to do many, many things with all of my machines. But, if I was setting up a storage system for somebody else, I always use FreeNAS because it just means that they can manage it with the web UI. And it's just
a lot easier.
I feel safer walking away from it that way because then I don't have to be responsible for maintaining it.
That's right. Cool. Okay, well, last question for the week. We have a long one here from Martin asking about FreeNAS.
Yes, so he had talked about having his two machines that he was backing two FreeNASes and making them back each other up. And he was running into some problems with it, apparently. And so he's provided some of the debugging information we asked for, including his list of ZFS snapshots and so on. Although he didn't seem to actually give us the error he was getting when doing the replication.
It's going to be a little hard to troubleshoot.
Specifically, he has a data set here on the replicated one called DS-sharing. And it's got 184 gigs of stuff in it, but when he does an ls on it, it shows up as empty. For that one, I think all he'd have to do is use ZFS mount that data set, or ZFS mount -a for all data sets, and then all those files will actually appear. I think with the replication, it doesn't mount them by default because it doesn't assume you want them mounted.
Sure. It's just exporting the data set, not replicating the mounts.
Yeah, because the mount point might you don't want it to mount over top of something on the system you're receiving the replication on, and also, but normally when you're replicating, you want on the destination for it to be read only. Otherwise, if it changes, then you can't continue replicating. You have to either roll back to the last snapshot or not replicate. So that's why they're not always mounted by default. So try ZFS mount -a and see if all your files show up. And so the rest of it, the rest of your data sets don't seem to be replicated yet. I'm not sure why. You would need to actually see, a log of the replication failing to know what was up with that. But we've included the link to the, I don't know, it's like 4,000 lines of output he's got here.
Yeah, yeah.
3,000.
If somebody wants to try and troubleshoot that.
Yeah, 3,000 lines of output. And, you know, if you want to help him out with via the FreeBSD forums or whatever, that would be great.
Cool. Okay, well, that's the end of our feedback and questions for the week. So, of course, we appreciate you guys writing in, and we want to mention that all the tutorials are going to be posted in their entirety at bsdnow.tv after the show. Also, you can send your questions, comments, show ideas, topics, or stories you want mentioned on the show to feedback@bsdnow.tv, and then we'll try and work it into a future episode. We're always looking for new tutorial ideas, just like we got the one today about using Puppet, Salt, Ansible, some of those. So if there's something specific you want to learn about, let us know so we can put it in the hopper and see if we can get it on a future episode. One thing we do want to mention, the FreeBSD core team elections are in progress. The nominations actually end today while we're recording the live show. So that would be Wednesday the 28th.
It's closed now, and there are 21 people running for the 9 seats on the FreeBSD core team, which kind of sets the goals for the project and
sets some direction.
Yeah, and sets some of the deals with things that require a kind of authoritative body to handle things. So
resolve disputes, that kind of thing.
So Alfred Perlstein, myself, Baptiste Dusson, Benno Rice, Ruslan Buchan, Ed Mast, Gavin Atkinson, who is on the previous core, Glenn Barber, Gleb Smirnov, George Neville-Neal, Hiroki Sato, who runs Asia BSDCan, Julia Mallet, Julian Elisher, Kabuya Kukak, or Koobs, also runs the FreeBSD Help Twitter account. Peter Wem, Eugene Robenkin, Olivier Robert, Rui Pao, and Robert Watson, Sean Bruno, and David Chisnell.
Nice.
So the polls are open now, and will close a month from now. And we'll end up with the 9 people that will make up the core team for the next 2 years.
Sweet. So, of course, we'll let you guys know in a future episode what the final core team's going to end up looking like.
And maybe we can summarize some of the platforms people have here down to like 5 bullet points so that we can cover them.
Yeah, that would be interesting, actually. People write up, so for those who don't know, people write up a little campaign
usually
document
many
on why
paragraphs.
they're a good candidate. Well, cool. So, of course, you can continue to watch our episodes live Wednesday, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC. So if you'd like to see us making the show and get in on the action, hop on IRC and chat with us. That would be cool. And, of course, we'll be back same time next week. So we'll be back in a moment also with our tutorial. We've moved it to the end of the show for people who are listening maybe in their car and need to watch that separately or something. So we'll put that at the end from now on. So we'll be back in just a moment with our tutorial. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next week. So we've briefly set up a DNS crypt in our OpenBSD router guide, but the tutorial today we're going to show you how to do it for any regular desktop or server system. It's going to explain a little more detail about what's actually happening and why you may want to use it. So why would you want to encrypt your DNS lookups? Probably because DNS is a horrible, insecure system. It has no authentication. It can be spoofed very easily and at any point in the connection. DNSSEC tries to help solve this problem, but it's not in very wide deployment right now. DNSSEC and DNSCrypt go hand in hand, complementing each other. So even if you choose a good server, any of the hops between you and that server can take over and redirect your queries. Once they've done so, they could do horrible things like redirect bsdnow.tv to linux.com. Ouch. Imagine trying to go to a website to learn about security, but instead being redirected to a website promoting buggy software. Don't let this situation happen to you. Keep your DNS secure. The tool we're going to be highlighting today is called DNSCrypt Proxy, and it was originally developed by OpenDNS. There are versions for lots of operating systems, and all the BSDs should have a native port or package available. After installing it from your favorite source, we're going to set it up for a single desktop or server system. If you want to run it on your entire network, which is probably the best way, consult the OpenBSD router tutorial. Combining DNSCrypt Proxy with a caching resolver like bind or unbound is usually an ideal setup. This port will not do any caching by itself, so every lookup has to make a round trip to the DNS server. So that is going to take some more time and bandwidth, so consider using it with a caching resolver on your gateway. So let's get started by first taking a look at what files were included with the software.
There are a few different reasons you might want to encrypt your DNS queries. The first one is privacy. When you do a DNS lookup, that goes out over the public internet unencrypted, meaning someone at your ISP or further along can see every request you make. which basically tells them every website you're trying to go to. So based on that, they could figure out patterns about you or incriminate you for certain things. And so by using DNSCrypt, you can hide the DNS lookups you're doing. So the first thing we need to do is install the package. So we'll install DNSCrypt-proxy. And there we go. If we do package info, you can see the files it installs. Specifically, you get a startup script, and the actual binary, and some readmes and so on. So now what we want to do is enable that. So we'll edit our rc.conf and set DNSCrypt proxy enable equals yes, and DNSCrypt proxy flags will specify the IP address we want it to run on and the port, and we'll specify the user we want it to run as, because it can support privilege separation, so why have it run as root when it doesn't need to? And we'll log to dev null, because if we're doing this to protect our privacy, we don't want to leave some logs laying around. So now the other thing we need to do is create the user. So user add _ DNSCrypt-proxy. Sorry, I did that earlier. So the next thing we need to do is configure our resolver. So if we go to etcresolve.conf, we can replace our existing name server with our new DNSCrypt. And then we can set some flags. If we use ch flags, we set SCHG, which is the system immutable flag, meaning this file cannot be modified by anyone until that flag is removed. And if you're using FreeBSD secure levels, you can actually make it so the flag can't be removed without first rebooting into a lower security level. This will prevent other users or even root from changing the resolve.conf, and specifically can also prevent things like the DHCP client from changing it. So now we just need to start the service. So DNSCrypt.proxy start. And we can see that it's running. So now when we look up BSDNow.tv, we get the IP address. And that's all the fun you need. Now all the DNS queries coming from this machine will be encrypted when they go out to the internet.